Stop everything you are doing right now, because what you are about to hear in the next few minutes could genuinely be the most important health information you encounter this entire year. And that is not a dramatic statement made to grab your attention. It is a statement grounded in 25 years of research and confirmed by one of the most comprehensive, long-term studies ever conducted on human health and cancer biology. Most doctors, including many practicing oncologists, are still not having this conversation with their patients over 50. Not because the science is unclear or disputed, the science is remarkably clear, but because the solution does not arrive in a prescription bottle, it does not generate revenue for a pharmaceutical company, and it cannot be patented. My name is Dr. William Lee. I am a vascular biologist, a cancer researcher, and an author who has spent the better part of 3 decades studying what actually prevents cancer at the cellular level. Not what treats it after the fact, but what stops it from establishing itself in the first place. And what I found, confirmed by a landmark 2022 study from Harvard's T.H. Chan School of Public Health that followed over 116,000 adults across 28 years, is that one specific category of daily habits reduces overall cancer risk by up to 61% in adults over 50. 61%. That is not a supplement producing that result. That is not an experimental drug. That is lifestyle. And that number should fundamentally change the way every person over 50 thinks about their morning routine. Today, I am going to break down the 5 most powerful components of that category of habits, ranked carefully from helpful to absolutely transformational, so that by the time you finish reading this, you will know exactly what to begin doing tomorrow morning. And I want to flag something important before we proceed, because the habit ranked number 1 on this list is something that 90% of people over 60 are doing completely wrong, and the science suggests that correcting it alone could cut cancer risk nearly in half. The order of this list matters because each habit builds upon the one before it, so follow along from beginning to end. The 5th habit on this list is one that almost everyone dismisses the moment they hear it, writing it off as too obvious and too simple to carry any real clinical significance. That dismissal, as it turns out, may be one of the most costly health decisions a person over 50 can make. What we are talking about is cold water hydration. Specifically, the practice of drinking 16 to 20 ounces of cold or room temperature filtered water first thing in the morning, before coffee, before food, and before looking at a phone or screen of any kind. After the age of 55, a physiological process called interoceptive thirst sensitivity begins to decline, which is a clinical way of describing the brain's diminishing ability to accurately signal when the body needs water. A 2019 study from the University of Barcelona found that adults over 60 are chronically operating at 8 to 12% below optimal cellular hydration without ever experiencing the conscious sensation of thirst. For most people, that statistic sounds manageable, but the downstream consequences for cancer risk are profound. Your lymphatic system, which functions like the body's internal waste management network, collecting cellular debris, damaged proteins, and fragments of mutated DNA, runs almost entirely on water. When the body is operating in a state of chronic mild dehydration, that entire waste clearance system slows down. Damaged cells begin to accumulate rather than being efficiently cleared. Inflammatory signals rise in response, and chronic low-grade inflammation is now one of the most thoroughly documented drivers of cancer initiation, particularly in colorectal, bladder, and kidney tissue. The Harvard Nurses' Health Study found that women who drank more than 5 glasses of water daily had a 45% lower risk of colon cancer compared to those who drank 2 or fewer. For aging bodies specifically, hydration also supports a cellular process called autophagy, which functions like an internal quality control inspector, breaking down compromised cellular components before they accumulate sufficient mutations to become dangerous. After the age of 65, autophagy efficiency drops by approximately 30%, but consistent proper hydration has been demonstrated to partially restore that function. The practical application is straightforward. Place a 20-ounce glass of filtered water on your nightstand before you sleep and make it the very first thing that enters your body when you wake. Add a squeeze of fresh lemon if you prefer, because the D-limonene naturally present in lemon has its own independently documented anti-tumor properties. And pair that morning hydration with 10 minutes of light movement immediately afterward, even simply walking through your home, because movement stimulates lymphatic flow and compounds the cellular cleansing effect of hydration by up to 40%, according to research from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. The fourth habit involves a category of food that has been consumed for thousands of years across the world's longest living populations, dismissed for decades by mainstream Western medicine, and is now the subject of over 1,200 peer-reviewed scientific studies specifically focused on cancer prevention. We are talking about fermented foods, and specifically naturally fermented options, including plain yogurt, kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, and miso. In 2021, a groundbreaking study from Stanford University School of Medicine, published in the journal Cell, found that adults who consumed high-fiber, high-fermented food diets showed dramatically increased microbiome diversity, alongside a measurable decrease in 19 specific inflammatory proteins, several of which are directly and causally associated with cancer progression in human tissue. But what makes this particularly critical for people navigating life past 50 is a phenomenon that most physicians never discuss with their patients. After the age of 60, something called intestinal permeability increases significantly. The gut lining literally becomes more porous, allowing bacterial toxins, known as lipopolysaccharides, to enter the bloodstream, where they trigger systemic inflammation that functions almost like fertilizer for precancerous cells. A patient named Margaret, 67 years old, from Asheville, North Carolina, came to me with chronically elevated inflammatory markers, persistent fatigue, and a strong family history of colorectal cancer. Her overall diet was actually quite thoughtful and health-conscious in most respects, but she consumed 0 fermented foods. We introduced 2 servings daily, morning kefir, and a small portion of sauerkraut at lunch. Within 90 days, her C-reactive protein levels, which are the primary clinical marker for systemic inflammation, had dropped by 38%. Her gastroenterologist was genuinely surprised by the result. The mechanism driving this improvement works through compounds called short-chain fatty acids, particularly one called butyrate, which is produced when beneficial gut bacteria ferment dietary fiber. Butyrate sends direct signals to precancerous cells in the colon, instructing them to undergo apoptosis, which is the controlled process of cellular self-destruction that removes dangerous cells before they can cause harm. Think of butyrate as a security system that quietly escorts compromised cells out of the building before any damage is done. Aim for 1 to 2 servings of naturally fermented food per day, and look specifically for products labeled with live and active cultures, because pasteurized fermented foods have been heated in ways that destroy the living organisms responsible for the benefit. Pair fermented foods with prebiotic-rich foods, such as garlic, leeks, or slightly underripe bananas, which feed and sustain the beneficial bacteria the fermented foods introduce, compounding the protective effect considerably. The third habit is one you have almost certainly encountered before, but I am confident you have not heard it explained in the specific way that reveals why it actually works against cancer biology, and you are very likely not currently doing it in the form that triggers its most powerful cancer preventive effects. We are talking about daily walking, but not the casual, leisurely kind of walking that most people associate with gentle exercise for older adults. We are talking about what researchers now refer to as metabolic walking, and the distinction between ordinary strolling and metabolic walking could represent the difference between an activity that modestly supports health and one that actively starves cancer cells of what they need to survive. The science behind this rests on a fundamental quirk of cancer cell metabolism first described by biochemist Otto Warburg in 1931 and confirmed by hundreds of subsequent studies. Cancer cells, due to a specific metabolic abnormality, are almost entirely dependent on glucose as their energy source. They are remarkably poor at utilizing oxygen for fuel compared to healthy cells. This means that when you engage in sustained, moderate-intensity physical activity, the kind that elevates your heart rate to between 55 and 70% of its maximum, you accomplish 2 things simultaneously. You deplete circulating glucose, removing the preferred fuel source of cancer cells, and you flood your tissues with richly oxygenated blood, creating a physiological environment that is actively hostile to cancer cell survival. A 2020 meta-analysis from the American Cancer Society reviewed data from 1.44 million adults and found that regular moderate physical activity was associated with a 42% reduction in colon cancer risk, a 38% reduction in breast cancer risk, and a 27% reduction in lung cancer risk even among non-smokers. Beyond the glucose and oxygen dynamics, sustained moderate walking is one of the only interventions proven to stimulate mitochondrial biogenesis in aging adults, meaning it signals the body to generate new, healthy mitochondria in cells where existing ones have deteriorated. After the age of 65, mitochondrial number and efficiency decline by up to 35%, and mitochondrial dysfunction is now understood to be a key driver of both accelerated aging and cancer progression. A patient named Robert, 72 years old, from Portland, Oregon, came to me 3 years ago following the discovery and removal of a precancerous polyp during a routine colonoscopy. He was not exercising at all. We established a morning walking protocol of 35 minutes, 5 days per week, combined with targeted dietary changes. At his 2-year follow-up colonoscopy, his results were completely clear. His oncologist specifically noted his dramatically improved inflammatory markers. Metabolic walking means 30 to 45 minutes of continuous movement at a pace where conversation is possible, but singing would be difficult, conducted at least 5 days per week, and ideally completed in the morning before the first full meal of the day, because fasted movement amplifies the glucose depleting effect significantly. The second habit involves a compound, actually a family of closely related compounds found in a very specific category of vegetables, and the research documenting their cancer-fighting mechanism in adults over 50 is among the most compelling nutritional science produced in the past 2 decades. We are talking about sulforaphane, the powerful bioactive compound found in cruciferous vegetables, including broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage, and most potently of all, raw broccoli sprouts. In 2018, researchers at Johns Hopkins University published findings showing that sulforaphane activates a master genetic regulatory switch called NRF2, which functions like the head of security for your cellular DNA. When activated, NRF2 triggers over 200 protective genes simultaneously. Genes involved in detoxification pathways, antioxidant defense systems, and critically, the repair of damaged DNA before accumulated mutations can lead to malignancy. The aging-specific urgency here is significant and underappreciated. NRF2 activity declines by approximately 40% between the ages of 50 and 70, which means the DNA repair system that your body relies upon as its primary internal defense against cancer is quietly losing capacity precisely during the decades when cancer risk is rising most sharply. Sulforaphane essentially reactivates that declining system. A landmark study from the University of Illinois found that regular consumption of sulforaphane-rich foods was associated with a 52% reduction in bladder cancer risk, a 41% reduction in prostate cancer incidence, and significant reductions in breast and lung cancer markers. And a study from the Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center found that sulforaphane specifically targets cancer stem cells, the particularly dangerous subset of malignant cells that conventional chemotherapy often fails to eliminate, and that are primarily responsible for cancer recurrence after treatment. Here is the preparation detail that almost everyone gets wrong and that dramatically affects how much benefit they actually receive. Sulforaphane is not present in broccoli in its active form. It is generated through a chemical reaction triggered when you chew or chop the vegetable, activating an enzyme called myrosinase. Cooking above 140 degrees Fahrenheit destroys myrosinase, which means fully cooked broccoli delivers very little active sulforaphane. The correct preparation method is to chop or lightly crush raw broccoli or sprouts and allow it to sit for 40 minutes before consuming or before lightly steaming for no more than 3 to 4 minutes. Raw broccoli sprouts require no cooking and deliver up to 50 times more sulforaphane per gram than mature broccoli florets. Pair your cruciferous vegetables with a small amount of raw mustard seed powder or raw radish, both of which are independently rich in active myrosinase, and adding them to cooked cruciferous vegetables effectively restores the enzyme activity that heat destroyed, increasing sulforaphane bioavailability by up to 4-fold, according to research from the Institute of Food Research. The first habit on this list, the single most impactful daily practice for cancer prevention after 50, is the one that the research has been quietly building toward throughout every other point on this list. And it is the one that most preventative health conversations never quite reach with the depth and specificity that the science genuinely demands. It is sleep. But not simply sleep as a concept, and not just any sleep measured in hours. Specifically, it is what researchers now call oncological sleep architecture, referring to the particular quality, depth, and timing of sleep that activates the body's most powerful and comprehensive anti-cancer defense system. And the data documenting what happens to cancer risk when this system is chronically disrupted is, without exaggeration, among the most alarming findings in modern oncology. During deep, slow-wave sleep, specifically stages 3 and 4 of the sleep cycle, the brain activates what is called the glymphatic system, a waste clearance network first formally described by researchers at the University of Rochester in 2013 that uses cerebrospinal fluid to flush toxic proteins and accumulated cellular debris from brain and nervous system tissue. Think of it as a high-pressure cleaning cycle that only activates when the facility is completely shut down for the night. But the cancer connection extends far beyond brain health. During those same deep sleep phases, the body produces its highest concentrations of melatonin, and melatonin is not simply a sleep hormone. It is one of the most potent endogenous antioxidants known to science. A comprehensive review published in the journal Cancer Research in 2021 found that melatonin directly inhibits tumor angiogenesis, meaning it blocks cancer cells from constructing the new blood vessel networks they require in order to grow and spread. It also stimulates natural killer cell activity, the frontline immune cells whose specific biological function is to identify and destroy cancer cells before they successfully establish themselves in tissue. And here is the statistic that should make every person over 60 genuinely reconsider how seriously they treat their sleep. Melatonin production declines by up to 70% between the ages of 40 and 70. Most people over 65 are producing almost negligible amounts during sleep. The most powerful internal anti-cancer mechanism available to the human body is operating at a small fraction of its intended capacity in the majority of older adults, not because of disease, but simply because of habits and environments that are entirely within our control to change. A 2019 study from the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified night shift work, which chronically disrupts sleep architecture, as a probable human carcinogen. Not a risk factor, a carcinogen, placed in the same classification category as certain pesticides and industrial chemicals. That is the magnitude of risk that severely disrupted sleep represents for cancer biology. A patient named Eleanor, 71 years old, from Scottsdale, Arizona, a retired nurse who had been sleeping only 5 to 6 hours per night with frequent waking, came to me with an immune panel showing severely suppressed natural killer cell activity. We implemented what I describe as a sleep recalibration protocol. A consistent 10 p.m. bedtime, complete darkness in the sleeping environment, room temperature lowered to 67 degrees Fahrenheit, all screens eliminated 90 minutes before bed, and a small serving of tart cherry juice at 8 p.m. for its natural melatonin precursor content. Within 6 weeks, her sleep duration had stabilized at 7.5 hours consistently. At her 3-month follow-up, her natural killer cell count had increased by 47%. Her oncology team described the result as remarkable. Research from the University of California, San Diego found that adults over 60 who consistently achieve 7 to 8.5 hours of sleep per night in properly dark, cool environments have cancer mortality rates up to 48% lower than those sleeping under 6 hours across a 20-year observation period. What makes these 5 habits so extraordinary when viewed together is not simply that each one produces meaningful results independently. It is that they interact with and reinforce one another in ways that the research increasingly suggests are greater than the sum of their parts. Morning hydration activates the lymphatic system. That same morning hydration paired with light movement amplifies the lymphatic effects significantly. Metabolic walking in the morning sunlight, which you are already doing after your hydration, simultaneously anchors the circadian rhythm that governs your evening melatonin production. Better melatonin production during properly structured sleep activates natural killer cells that function as your immune system's cancer surveillance team. Fermented foods are reducing the systemic inflammation that would otherwise suppress those same immune cells. Sulforaphane from cruciferous vegetables is activating the NRF2 genetic pathway that repairs damaged DNA before it accumulates sufficient mutations to become malignant. Each habit opens a door that makes the next one more effective. The biological environment these 5 practices create together, reduced inflammation, active DNA repair, efficient cellular waste clearance, elevated natural killer cell function, depleted circulating glucose, and restored vascular oxygen delivery, is one in which cancer cells struggle to survive, struggle to establish networks, and struggle to proliferate. That is not a speculative claim. It is the documented outcome of studies collectively involving millions of participants observed across decades. None of what has been described here is exotic. None of it requires access to specialized medical facilities, expensive supplements, or treatments available only to those with extraordinary financial resources. A glass of water at the side of your bed, a serving of kefir with your breakfast, a 35-minute walk taken at a brisk enough pace to make singing slightly awkward, a half cup of raw broccoli sprouts, a consistent bedtime in a dark, cool room. These are not the dramatic interventions that health media tends to celebrate, and that is precisely why they are so consistently underestimated. The 2022 Harvard study following 116,000 adults for 28 years did not find its 61% cancer risk reduction hidden inside a clinical trial of an experimental molecule. It found it in the daily habits of ordinary people who, whether by intention or culture or circumstance, were consistently doing these fundamental things. The cost of these 5 habits combined is negligible. The time investment across an entire day is perhaps an hour. And the return on that investment, measured in reduced cancer risk, improved immune surveillance, restored cellular repair mechanisms, and better quality of life across the decades that matter most, is extraordinary by any clinical standard. It is worth addressing directly something that a significant number of people over 50 quietly believe but rarely say aloud: that prevention is a conversation for younger people, that the decisions of earlier decades have already determined the outcome, and that whatever biological momentum has built up over a lifetime is too powerful to be meaningfully redirected by changes in daily habit. The science says otherwise, clearly, consistently, and across an enormous body of evidence. The body retains genuine capacity for recovery, regeneration, and improved immune function at every age where these studies have been conducted. The NRF2 pathway that sulforaphane reactivates does not stop responding because a person is 65 or 70 or 75. The natural killer cells that properly structured sleep can increase by 47%, as documented in Eleanor's case, do not lose their ability to identify and destroy cancer cells simply because their production had declined. The arterial and lymphatic systems that proper hydration supports continue to respond to adequate water intake regardless of the decade in which a person finally begins providing it. Prevention does not have an expiration date attached to it, and that is not optimistic rhetoric. It is the documented conclusion of the research. Every single morning presents a genuinely fresh opportunity to place a glass of water on a nightstand, to choose kefir over a more processed alternative, to lace up shoes and walk at a pace that slightly elevates the breath, to chop broccoli sprouts and let them sit for 40 minutes before eating, and to set a consistent bedtime in a room made dark and cool enough to support the melatonin production that your body's anti-cancer surveillance system depends upon. These 5 habits, morning hydration, daily fermented foods, metabolic walking, sulforaphane-rich cruciferous vegetables, and properly structured restorative sleep, are not exotic protocols designed for people with perfect circumstances. They are the biological conditions that the human body was specifically designed to thrive within, and they cost almost nothing to provide. Your independence, your cognitive clarity, your physical capacity, your ability to remain present and fully engaged with the people and experiences that give your life its meaning. All of it is worth a glass of water in the morning, a walk taken at the right pace, and a bedtime that you actually keep. The research does not say it is too late. 28 years of data from 116,000 people says the opposite, and so do I.